Los Angeles, a city known for its splendor, witnessed a very different scene that night. The sky that was usually decorated with sparkling city lights had now turned into a sea of fiery red. The wind carried the sound of burning buildings, accompanied by the panicked screams of residents trying to escape. The air was filled with the smell of burnt smoke and fear that could almost be felt on the skin. The fire came suddenly, like a hungry, savage creature. Starting in an old warehouse in an industrial area, the fire spread quickly through the dry summer winds. Building after building gave way. Old wood became easy prey, and even concrete could not hold up for long. Within hours, the fire had spread to residential areas. In one corner of the city stands a small mosque called Nur al-Salam Mosque. The mosque is not a large or luxurious building, just a simple place of worship with faded white walls and a small silver dome that shines softly. This mosque has been around for more than 5 decades, a silent witness to various events, both big and small, that have colored the journey of this city. For some people, the mosque is a place of peace, a place where they seek tranquility from the hustle and bustle of the city, but for others, the mosque is a symbol of something foreign, something they don't understand or don't want to understand. Tensions have long been there, though masked by the pleasantries of everyday life. As the fire began to approach the surrounding area of the mosque, the atmosphere became tense. The walls collapsed and the roof caved in. Many thought that the mosque would suffer the same fate. However, something strange happened. As the fire approached the courtyard of the mosque, it seemed to lose its strength. The old iron fence surrounding the mosque remained cold, untouched by embers. The small trees around the mosque yard were unburned, while the other trees in the area had turned to charcoal. The fire seemed to have stopped, unable to reach the building, as if something invisible was protecting it. The residents who witnessed the scene were silent, amazed and confused. An old man who had lived in the area for more than 30 years stood frozen, as if realizing something deeper from the incident. I could only shake my head. "I've seen fires before, but this doesn't make sense," he muttered as he looked at the mosque from afar. When morning came, the devastation caused by the fire was clearly visible. The entire area had been reduced to rubble. Houses, shops, even the streets were destroyed. However, amidst the destruction, the Nur al-Salam Mosque stood strong without the slightest damage. Its silver dome still shone in the morning sun, contrasting with the ash and charcoal surrounding it. News of this miracle quickly spread among the remaining inhabitants. People began to flock to the site to see for themselves what had happened. Some saw it as a sign of divine protection, a miracle that could not be explained by human logic. Others viewed it with disbelief, even suspicion. "Why is the mosque the only one that survived?" a young woman asked her friend. "Why are our houses destroyed while that building is untouched?" At first, it was just a whisper, but over time it turned into a louder rumor. Those who were previously indifferent to the existence of the mosque now began to see it with different eyes, filled with dislike, which slowly turned into hatred. The days after the fire were a time of confusion for Los Angeles residents. Local and national media outlets were abuzz with coverage of the disaster, calling it one of the most destructive fires in the city's history. But amid the reports of damage and loss of life, a small story began to steal the spotlight. The miracle of the Nur al-Salam Mosque still standing amid the destruction. Journalists flocked to the mosque, carrying cameras and microphones, capturing images of the simple white building. It appeared untouched by the raging fire. Its silver dome reflected the sunlight, creating the impression that the mosque was not only safe, but also preserved by an unseen force. Many wrote stories about divine protection, and some religious figures referred to this event as Muk. But amid the praise, whispers of suspicion have begun to be heard among locals. How could such an old building survive? "It's not a miracle. There must be something there," said a middle-aged man at a coffee shop that has reopened after the fire. Several people around him nodded in agreement. "Maybe they have chemicals in there, something that puts out fires," he added, his eyes narrowing as if searching for the truth behind the lie he believed. Tensions that had previously been hidden began to surface. Nur al-Alam Mosque, which for years had been a small part of the community's lives, was now the center of attention. In the area, it has now become a center of attention. Most of the Muslim residents who used to worship at the mosque lost their homes in the fire, and now they are gathering in the mosque's courtyard to seek temporary shelter. The sight has drawn outrage among some non-Muslim residents who feel the mosque has taken over public space. The mosque needs to be torn down, a young woman told a community meeting held in a makeshift town hall. Not just because of the fire, but the mosque didn't belong here in the first place. It's changing our neighborhood. Voices of support emerged from the corners of the room. Those who had previously been silent now felt they had a reason to speak. Meanwhile, Sarah, a Muslim who attended the meeting, could only keep her head down, trying to hold back her anger. The tension quickly escalated. At night, small groups began to gather around the mosque, discussing in hushed but emotional tones. Some tried to find a way to approach the authorities and have the mosque demolished under the pretext of security. Others, however, were more daring and made plans to act on their own. On the other hand, the Muslim religious leaders at the mosque remained steadfast. They believed that this mosque is protected by a power greater than humans. Whatever happens, they will not give up the mosque so easily. An old imam with a long white beard spends his nights in the mosque, praying devoutly and believing that this test is. However, night after night, the atmosphere around the mosque grew increasingly tense. Residents who had lost everything in the fire viewed the mosque with a mixture of suspicion and anger. Those who had previously only complained now began to take more concrete action. "This is not a coincidence," said an older man known as an influential figure in the community. "The mosque is a manifestation of something that is against us. We cannot let this continue. If the government does not act, we must act." Small groups gathered at several points around the devastated neighborhood. They planned something more than vandalism. The fire that had once consumed the neighborhood seemed to be returning, this time directed deliberately at the mosque that had become a symbol of division in their eyes. However, what they did not know was that their plans would not go as planned. Nur al-Salam Mosque was not just a building. There was something bigger behind its white walls. Something that had witnessed centuries of human turmoil and remained unshaken. The remains of the Great Fire still leave their traces, thin smoke rising from the rubble, charcoal scattered along the roads, and a warm feeling still in the air. But in a small corner of the city, a darker mood is building itself. In an abandoned building that survived the flames, a group of citizens gather with determined faces. They are not ordinary citizens who just want to restore their lives after the disaster. They are people who have allowed anger to rule their hearts. "Look what's left of us," said a tall man in a deep voice. His face was covered in small burns, the result of a fire. "We lost our home, our family shop, and the mosque. The mosque stood without a single damage. Is that fair?" Their plan was simple but deadly. That night, they decided to light the fire again. They brought gasoline, torches, and other tools needed to complete the task. However, as they began to move towards the mosque, something strange began to happen. The previously dark, starless sky slowly changed. Thick clouds gathered above the area, and the wind began to blow stronger. The previously warm air temperature suddenly became cold, piercing to the bones. In the courtyard of the mosque, an old guard on duty that night stood in front of the door. His hands were holding prayer beads, his lips kept muttering prayers. He looked into the distance, staring at the shadows that were starting to move in front of him. When the group arrived in front of the mosque, the atmosphere around them felt different. The air became heavy, as if every step they took had to fight an invisible force. However, they decided to continue. They lit torches and began pouring gasoline on the mosque's fence and yard. One of them, a man in a black leather jacket, stepped forward to throw the torch toward the building. That's when something extraordinary happened. The torch, which should have immediately struck the gasoline and created a small explosion, suddenly went out in mid-air. The flame that was burning at the tip of the torch simply disappeared, like a candle blown out by the wind. The man was silent. His hands were shaking, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. "Ken." They tried again. This time, two men went forward together, each carrying a torch. However, the result was the same. Before the torches touched the gasoline, the flames on their tips simply went out. The gasoline they had poured on them showed no signs of igniting, even when they tried to light it with a match. "Something is wrong here," a young woman in the group said in a trembling voice. She backed away slowly, her eyes gazing at the mosque with a mixture of fear and awe. Meanwhile, inside the mosque, the old guard continued to pray devoutly. He did not know the details of what was happening outside, but he could feel the presence of something greater than humans. The walls of the Nur Salam Mosque vibrated softly, as if speaking in a language that only a heart full of faith could understand. The group finally decided to retreat, not because they were giving up, but because fear began to creep into their hearts. They left their torches and tools in the darkness. Even though they were gone, large shadows still surrounded the mosque. Glowing eyes stared at them intently, as if watching their every move. In their dreams that night, voices they couldn't understand continued to echo in their heads, even after they had left. News of the failed attack quickly spread among the residents. Some saw it as a sign that the mosque was indeed protected by something divine. But for those whose hearts were still filled with hatred, the news only fueled their anger. What they do not realize is that every step of their hatred brings them closer to destruction. Nur Salam Mosque is not just a building, it is a witness to something far beyond hatred, fire, or even human life. That night, Los Angeles fell asleep in heavy silence. But for those who have ever approached Nur Salam Mosque with bad intentions, disaster befell them. A curse made them wake up with their bodies drenched in cold sweat, in a shabby apartment in the corner of Pertingi City. With their faces full of burns, they woke up in a terrible condition. One of them, a man, had a nightmare. In his dream, he was in the middle of a hot field, surrounded by black-hooded figures. The figures were silent, looking at him expressionlessly. In front of him, the mosque looked like a living giant. When he looked up, his face was reflected in the large fire, as if he were being punished. The man woke up with a scream, waking the residents of the surrounding apartments. His face turned pale, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly afraid. But the man was not the only one who experienced this. Elsewhere, other members of the group also experienced similar dreams. In their dreams, they saw the image of a sturdy mosque, untouched by fire. Meanwhile, they themselves were surrounded by forces they could not fight. Each dream carried the same message: do not approach the mosque. One of them, a young woman who had previously participated in the arson attempt, could no longer contain her fear. She woke up in the middle of the night and decided to leave town. With a small bag of clothes and some money, she boarded a bus headed for Arizona, hoping to escape the shadows of her dreams. But even on the way, she couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching her. Telling his dream to a passenger on the bus, an old grandmother sitting next to him. With a trembling voice, he described the mosque as a bright light emanating from it and voices echoing in his mind. However, the old woman only smiled and said, "Maybe it was a warning. Sometimes we need to hear a voice from above to remind us." The woman said nothing more. She just looked out the window, realizing that there was no place far enough to escape what fate had in store for her. Meanwhile, in the city, news of these dreams began to spread. The citizens who had previously been mere spectators began to feel afraid. Some believed that the mosque was truly protected by divine powers. They began to come to the mosque not to destroy it, but to seek protection. However, the more fanatical group, led by the tall man, saw these dreams as a form of provocation. For them, the mosque should not only be destroyed, but also fought with force. "What we are experiencing is an illusion," the tall man said in their secret meeting. "We cannot let fear control us. We will use explosions." The group began to gather explosives. They contacted dark contacts on the outskirts of the city to get what they needed. It was all done in the shadows of night, away from the sight of the police or other citizens. However, every time they tried to devise a plan, something strange happened. Their explosives suddenly got wet for no reason. The cables they connected broke on their own. Even one night, one of them heard a voice like a whisper on the phone. A cleric who came from out of town to see the mosque said in a low voice, "This is a sign. This mosque is protected. No human power can bring it down." They decided to launch a final attack that night. As they prepared to carry out their plan, the city of Los Angeles felt another strange vibration. The sky darkened, though there were no rain clouds. The wind blew hard, carrying sounds that only those on the edge could hear. The tall man stood in front of the van. His eyes were full of determination, but there was also a shadow of hesitation. For a moment, he felt as if something was holding him back. However, in his heart, there was a small doubt that began to grow. The nightmares that kept haunting him could not be ignored. He tried to bury the fear with anger, but the image of the mosque standing firmly always appeared in his mind, like a memory that could not be erased. As the clock struck 2 a.m., they began to move. The van moved slowly, carrying its deadly cargo. The normally glittering city of Los Angeles was eerily silent that night, as if the entire city was holding its breath. No police, no pedestrians, just a piercing silence. But for the group, the silence was a sign that their mission was nearing its climax. The silence felt like a threat. Inside the van, the tall man felt sweat trickling down his temples. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to ignore the roar of voices in his mind. But the closer they got to the mosque, the louder the voices became. He turned to his companions in the back seat, hoping someone would speak. But all were silent. They just stared ahead with tense expressions. "You won't win this time," the voice sounded clearer. The man shook his head, trying to chase him away. When they arrived near the mosque, the sight they saw left them speechless. The mosque stood in awe-inspiring silence, lit only by the moonlight. But there was something strange above the dome of the mosque. A soft golden light seemed to shine like a lamp that never went out. It was like an inexplicable source of energy.